Hello, I wanted to show you how to model this in Houdini and also just to talk about how I model in Houdini and why I model in Houdini. And a lot of people will say like you shouldn't model in Houdini or Houdini is not good for modeling. It should be just modeled in Maya or Max or Blender and imported in. And I do have a lot of experience with some of those applications, especially with hard surface modeling. But it doesn't have to be really slow in Houdini either. You don't need everything to have a perfect procedural setup that could take months of work. It just has to serve your purpose. And I will explain how I built this and why. But first, my 3 reasons why I like using Houdini for modeling. And the first one being, as I do an assembly that may consist of a lot of these objects, I like to be able to modify an object while I assemble. So here I'm able to change the size of it. I could go down here and change the thickness of the frame. I could select one of my nodes here and make the mounting bracket area a little smaller. And I didn't even intend to have all these customizable when I built this. I just kind of thought about it along the way. Like I didn't think of everything I was gonna do, plan it out. I just started working non-linearly and just going back and filling things in. And it kind of just worked its way like that. So that's like the first reason I like to use Houdini for modeling, especially hard surface. The second reason I like to use Houdini for modeling is I could make alternate versions of this model very quickly. There's nothing lost in here. I could go back to any step, do any kind of changes. It's true that if I add vertices or points somewhere in here, I will break a lot into these custom selections I've made, but I could just reselect those. It's not that difficult. So to make an alternate version, it'll be very quick, a lot quicker than having to remodel this in Maya or Max once you've already had this idea down and the nodes in place. And I could like see the screw holes could be moved as well. There's just a lot of options I have very easily in my setup. And the third reason I like using Houdini for modeling is just a very non-linear way to work. I could do this and then realize I could make it a little more customizable or procedural, and I could just delete a big chunk out of the middle here and maybe find a new way to do it. As I learn Houdini, I'll get better and I'll find a better way I could have done this that I didn't think of at the time, and it just gets better over time, which gives me that option. So that's the 3 reasons I like doing it in Houdini. So I'll just go through what I've done here to create this model, and hopefully you could follow along. I started with a grid, and the reason I used a grid because I wanted this option to use these handles to be able to change the size very quickly. So it was just an idea I had and I went with it. I chamfered some of the corners. I just chamfered all the points in the object to just get this kind of shape. Then I used an ends node and I changed the close U to unroll with new points, and I did that just to get rid of all the geometry, just keep this as a regular curve, simplify it so I could do what I want with it. And honestly, I didn't have the idea to do this till later. I started already modeling and then I thought about doing this. Then we go down here and I just did a resample with, I resampled by polygon edge and did a maximum segments of 2. I just basically added a point in between each segment. And so far, it's quite procedural. Like I could do anything before it, I'll still maintain its integrity. So here, it gets a little more complicated. I wanted to just select these middle points. And I did this little hack way to do it. I'm sure there's might be a better way, and please leave in the comments if there is. But what I did, I just created a bound node from here, which creates a box at the bounding size of your model. So as I change this, the bounding box will change size as well. And that's a very useful node to do that. I use it for a lot of things. I use a peak node to just give it thickness because it came in as a very thin model. Then I used a transform node to just stretch it out like this and another one like this. And those were merged together just to make this shape. And the only reason I did that was just to select these points, because in a group I could select keep in bounding regions and change it to bounding object. Also making sure that the group type is points, because this only works on points. This gives me that selection and still procedural. Down here I just beveled that point into many points. And again, I thought about doing that later because I had an idea of what shape I was going for. I put a fuse here just to make sure. If you see without it, there's 2 points here and they weren't welded together because this unroll stop kind of made it a non-closed surface. So I fused that in so it's nice and fused. I created a group with just a custom selection. I just clicked this arrow and selected these points. And that's where if I do anything up here and the point count changes, that will break my selection. But I'm okay for that because I've made this tree myself. I remember what I did. As soon as if I did add more points, I would just go back here, reselect it. And it's still very quick for me. So I did one on the x-axis, on the y-axis, just so I could use that later. And I transformed the x-axis one. I left the y-axis alone. I didn't do anything with that. But as you can see, what that did was, I'll show you at the end. I was using it to kind of make this shape, and I could always go back on that transform, and you could see I could scale it here, and that would just change the shape I have here. So now, going back to this transform up here, as you can see, I also used the group x-axis. That's the group up here that I did a custom selection. You could do a custom selection in just the transform node up here as well instead of using a group. I did it with a group just because I wasn't sure what I'd be doing with it later. So as I was going along, it just made sense to do it this way. So we're just here in this node list. So I hope you're still following along. And then, so after I did the transforms, I did a sweep node. And this basically lets you just sweep a shape along the spline that was here. And in this case, I changed the surface shape to square tube. It just, by default, I think it's the second input for cross section. You could do a ribbon. I did a square tube on this one. It was working for what I wanted to do. And we'll go back later what we did on this branch here, but for now we're just going to go straight down. And then on this edit node, I just moved this edge down, and I just kind of moved the edges around till I got this shape. So before and after, all I did was select the edge loops, double click the edge, I'll select the loop and then move it. And again, if I changed the number of points before this would get messed up. I would have to just put another edit mode, modify again. But I didn't foresee me needing to change the points because I did kind of plan out what I wanted with the points. That's where Houdini can run you into trouble, but I'm okay with it because I know what I'm doing with it. And usually when I model this, and I am modeling organically, I don't plan out everything ahead. You kind of just run through it once really quick and then realize you just have to modify a bunch of things along the way before you finish. And that's what I did too. I didn't just get this the first time, but it was still pretty quick. This model did not take me a long time. I didn't spend weeks of time. I did it just in one day, not a full day, obviously. Just played around a bit and ended up with the model. So I did that to get just a better shape of what I want. And even after it's all finished, I could always go back here and keep tweaking it. Then I used the split node and I manually selected the faces I wanted to split out. So these are the faces I split out. And on here, these are the ones that remained. So I'll just keep going straight down. So before this, after I split out the faces this was missing, I did a poly bridge by selecting these faces here and down here, one for group 1, one for the second group, which doesn't weld these two faces like in Maya or 3ds Max. A lot of times it would if you ran bridge, but that's why I did a fuse after, which will weld those vertices. And honestly, that's very similar to how you would model in 3ds Max or Maya or Blender. It's not that much different here. It's just that you don't have this bridge permanent. Like, you could always go back and reselect different faces. And that's part of what I like about it, but it is a bit slower. And you just have to be okay with that if you're working this way. Because I think it might be quicker in the long run if you had a big assembly to do with a lot of these kind of models. Alright, so I'm going to fuse these up. And then this group, I just kind of selected the bottom vertices because I wanted to make it a bit shorter, not as tall. And that was just a mistake that when I originally was making, I didn't plan ahead, so I had to do it after. And it's okay having that extra control here because I could just adjust that at any time and it's always there. Alternatively, I didn't need that. I could have just gone back to this edit node and moved the vertices up. That would have been acceptable. I just wanted this control for later. Then I did a poly bevel because I wanted to subdivide this and I wanted these edges to be hard edge. So I did a poly bevel, and again I manually selected the edges just like you would in Maya before you bevel a lot of the times as well. Just because if I use the ignore flat edges option, it wasn't extruding the flat ones here, and that was important for me to get the right topology later. So then I subdivide. This gives me that nice look that I like. Even though it's hard edges, there's still some smoothing happening around these corners, and it makes your model look a lot better. Without that, it's just a lot more flat, and it is missing that extra bit of look to it, in my opinion. And I added a peak here later. This is just to make it a little bit smaller, and then I merged it with the other geo that was separated. So I'm going to go back up where the split has happened. As you can see, this geo, I edited these corners to be straight because before that it was all chamfered like so, and I wanted them to be straight in this situation. Then I did a poly bridge here, I did another one here, and just making sure the edges line up, like so. That's why I used, in the poly bridge, you could see I used a division of 3, which gave me the edges that lined up. But again, I had to fuse because they didn't weld by default. Then again, I did the same group as I did here, so I could change the height. And again, I could have also done that in the edit node here, but I didn't for reasons I said. Here I poly beveled the hard edges, and again I selected it manually, and that's fine as long as the vert points number doesn't change. If it does, you just have to reselect a lot of these. But I could do that very quickly by going through this because the idea of the model is already in place. Then I'm going to subdivide that, which gave me the look I wanted, merge that together with the other geo, and we're almost there. So now I wanted to add the little screws here. As you can see in the final model, I have the little screws here. So after I did that, I kind of paused here for a minute, and then on a separate place right here, I just started modeling the screw. So I'm going to go to that now to show you how I did that. So I'd start with a grid. Actually, I started with the tube here. I just created the shape of the screw that I wanted, and I just needed the screw head. And then I wanted to boolean the cut into the screws, so I decided to go for Phillips head screw. So I created this grid, I blasted the polygons I didn't want, I extruded, edit, poly beveled it, and I would look at reference to just see the shape I wanted it, and polyfill, mostly just because I forgot to poly extrude with the output back on, but I forgot about it. I didn't want to screw up my edit node changes, so I just added a polyfill after. Then I use that to boolean the screw head, add normal, just to fix the smoothing groups, and the transform was just to move it a little bit to align it with my other model. So now I wanted it to copy it to the main model, but I also wanted to take this tube and cut a hole out. Because if you could see in my final model, I don't just have a screw head on top, I wanted to actually cut the hole out. So here's the tube, and the way I wanted to do it is I copy it to points on the model that is actually part of the shape of the model. So that if I change the size of the model, not only does the screw move, but the hole moves as well. That's booleaning out of the model, and that's the big advantage to me, doing it this way. So right around here, when we still had our spline, before I did the sweep, I thought, okay, well, I could just use some of these points I have here to use that for the location of my screws. So I split out just these 4 points here. As you can see, they're just the ones that are in a little bit from these ones. And I selected these manually again. And I just used an edit just to move the position of them, because I wanted some granular control of that. So now these 4 points I could place into the points area of my copy to points, and my tube here that's being used for the boolean. And if I see my boolean here, I take the main model here and then I boolean out these holes. And what's good about that, and this is also what I love about modeling in Houdini, is, well, I still have these points. I already spent the work in getting them. Well, I could just copy to points on the screws as well, and they'll always be aligned to where the holes are, because the tubes are using the same points to be positioned. And you'll also notice an attribute randomize here, and I wanted the screws to not all be facing the same direction, because it's not realistic. So they're randomly rotated. Because here I put an orient tab, and then I adjusted. This is actually complicated to think about in Houdini, because it uses quadrillions, which is a 4-dimensional rotation. So if you just copy these settings here, that should get you the rotation on one of the axes. And then all I did was merge that back into the main model. You'll notice there's a poly bevel here as well, because I just added an extra bevel on the model, just to give it that extra look. And it also beveled the edges around the boolean, which is what I wanted. I don't mind these aren't all quads, because this is happening at the last step, and it's not changing my ability to modify the mesh like it would if it was possibly a different program. And so that's merged with the screws, and you'll notice the screen also shows up here. And all I did for the screen was just way back up here, I just took the grid that we started with, I transformed it just the scale to be a little smaller, and I extruded it a little bit, and that's just the easiest model you could do. I put a color node to color it, merge it back in, and then just a normal to to fix the smoothing issues with a cusp angle of 33. And that's just how I did this one and how I like to model in Houdini. Thank you for listening.